So I'd like to start with an informal poll. How many of you have different political views from your parents or siblings? More than half. And of those of you with different views, how do you work with that? Do you are you comfortable with having conversations about those differences? How many are comfortable having conversations? And how many of you find it challenging and better just to avoid contentious topics altogether? Okay, well, about half and half. So, growing up, my parents were not really involved in politics that I remember. Although I do remember in around 1964, they changed from being from Democrats to being Republicans. They voted for Barry Goldwater that year. Um, and since that time, then they voted for Nixon and Reagan and both of the Bushes. And they weren't so happy during the Clinton years and the Carter years, the Obama years. To be honest, I wasn't very interested in politics most of my life. It was really during the Obama years that I got more focused on what was happening in the country. And I lived in Australia at that time, and so occasionally I'd be talking with my father on the phone, and he'd start talking about his disagreements with Obama or his policies, and I would either change the subject or I would say, "Oh, Dad, you don't want to run a perfectly good conversation by talking about politics, do you?" And he'd chuckle, and then we'd go on and talk about the weather or something else. So these were some of the things we did. My sister and I have supported different political parties our entire lives, I think. And that's been a bit of a challenge. To her credit, she insisted that our friendship is more important than our political views. And so we have just basically avoided talking about politics or any contentious issues all these years. So during the last pre-election season, I noticed that we were both pretty invested in who was going to be the next president, um, and that I felt more and more uncomfortable that I couldn't even have conversation with her about our views. It was kind of painful, actually. Um, or even related subjects like climate change, even that was contentious, or the role of government, how big it should be, those sorts of things. So it seemed that due to avoiding these topics all these years, we had unknowingly undermined our ability to have those kind of conversations with each other. And that if we weren't careful, that inability had the potential now to really damage our friendship. And so we'll keep in mind that at the Abbey, we don't have long conversations with our families anyway. Every couple of weeks, we're going to have a short conversation. And also talking about politics and um, political figures tends to fall under idle speech or senseless speech. So it's not something that we focus on a lot anyway. However, as people who have watched any number of BBCs or talks from Venerable at the Abbey, you know that we try to use current events to exemplify what we're understanding about the Dharma and to try to understand what are the motivations behind things that are happening in the world today. So, since 2016, that important election, I've read a few books trying to understand, what really motivated the Tea Party and um, what is this phenomena about angry white men? That was the name of a book I read. It was very interesting. And I've just recently bought one of Bob Woodward's books on Trump, trying to understand who is this man. And since the last election, I feel a sense of urgency to grow my own capacity, to be interested in and able to listen to different perspectives. I have to own my own part in this situation. To increase my tolerance of different views and to call out my own biases and prejudices. Also, because this has been highlighted with my sister, it's also an opportunity to differentiate a little bit more from her. One of the most difficult groups of people we can have these discussions with is family members. Why? Because often we identify with them. We see them as part of ourselves. And, in this case, I have found myself thinking, how could my sister think that way? And she's probably thought the same thing. So that has come up. So here's an opportunity to notice that I can be okay. I'm an adult, I'm an individual, I'm separate from her. I can have my own opinions, she can have her own opinions, and we can hopefully still learn. We have the potential to learn to listen to each other better and to, yeah, to give each other some space to have different ideas. So since the last election, and since the last election, I've been very determined not to succumb to political anger. I don't want to spend 4 years being angry at the person in the White House. And I think it seems to be kind of a general feeling in the country, if I'm not wrong. For instance, at the recent hands-off march in Spokane, two of the nuns were able to attend that, and what we found is that there was a real sense of camaraderie and joyfulness and celebration of being together and having the freedom to express our opinions about what was going on. So perhaps I'm doing my own soul searching along with the Democratic Party, like what went wrong and what is it we don't understand about half the country, that we're so polarized at this time. So last fall, when Mary Grace was here, she was talking about a one-on-one conversation that she had had through the group called Braver Angels, and it really piqued my curiosity to find out more about them. So Braver Angels is a grassroots movement to depolarize and restore civic trust in America. So I've been spending a little bit of time on their website trying to hone my own skills and learn some things. So their mission is bringing Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic with respectful embrace of political disagreements, where civic friendships can flourish and competing perspectives strengthen our nation, not undermine them, but actually strengthen them. I remember a day when different politicians on different sides of the aisle had very close friendships with each other. I mean, this has happened since the beginning of our country, and yet today, very, very little of that's happening, it seems. So Braver Angels' goal is not to change people's views of issues, it's to change people's views of each other, to get people to start talking. And what they find is that when they create a safe space for that to happen, people do find a sense of respect and common ground and realize that a lot of their stereotypes of the other were wrong. So that's encouraging. So I found out that they use basic family therapy principles to promote constructive dialogue between conservatives and liberals. And we may think that we're so polarized as a nation that we can't discuss difficult issues, but research has shown that really there's only about 21% of the population that are so enraged about certain things that they can't have or don't want to have those kind of conversations. That leaves 80% of us who might want to try to bridge that divide and really understand each other. But where do the cameras focus? On the 20%. And so it's understandable that there is this misunderstanding or misperception that our country is even more polarized than it actually is. So I've been inspired by the various things that Braver Angels offers. They have in-person and online workshops. They have very respectful, moderated debates about current hot topics where they actually have a moderator, and it's almost like using Robert's Rules of Orders. At least that's what it appeared to be. I haven't watched it too closely. They also organize these one-to-one conversations of people with different points of view. That's what Mary Grace was describing to us. They offer professional e-courses for improving skills. I recently did one on depolarizing oneself. That was very helpful. They do podcasts and town halls. They probably do many other things that I don't even know about. But they found that when they get people to take the first step, that people invariably discover that the things they think about the other side are not true. In fact, one of the first things they do in workshops is they have people, like blue people, liberals would say, what do you think conservatives think about your group? And then to see, we can come up with those stereotypes. And then the next question is there a kernel of truth in that? Really getting people to look inside a bit more closely. So when I was taking this e-course called Depolarizing Within, I found it very humbling to acknowledge my own biases. For instance, seeing how often I have found myself thinking about those people, lumping all people together as if the whole category are all in lockstep and think the same way about things. Or how often I've found myself assigning negative motives to the other group, but only positive motives to my group. Now, how realistic is that? Demonizing is what it comes down to. How often I've found myself focusing on the most extreme or outrageous ideas and people on the other side, making it hard to see how a reasonable person could remain in that group. So these are probably things that we've all had experience with at some time. So the course offers some strategies for counteracting our inner polarization, challenging those stereotypes, seeing how varied people are, how complex a lot of the ideas that we're talking about really are. I listened to a talk by Steve Bannon not that long ago. It was an interview, and I was surprised to hear some logic to what he was talking about. It's like, really? So that has encouraged me to, I'm a Buddhist nun. I'm supposed to be focusing on the Dharma. I'm not going to spend hours and hours researching this stuff, but I want to know more. I want to know enough that I can, really cut some of these stereotypes that I'm holding about people with different political views. They also provided tips for how to talk in non-polarizing ways and also how to depolarize conversations with like-minded people. Often, many of us are staying in our own echo chambers, and then we can very easily talk very derogatively about people on the other side as if we've got all the answers. And actually, the situation is so complex these days that how could any of us have all the answers? So that's been very humbling to look at. So this has given me courage to go forward with some ideas about how to talk with my sister. My brother and I share similar views, but how to engage with my sister. Last year, a few of us watched a very encouraging documentary called Undivide Us. And those of you who weren't here, I really encourage you to watch it. It's available on PBS, on the internet. And it examines America's political polarization through using focus groups discussing divisive topics. And what was so unique about this group, the focus groups, was that instead of asking each person their own individual views, they had some chance to get to know each other and talk generally about their points of view. And then they would ask one person to describe a person from the opposite side. What do you think this person thinks about this contentious issue? And then they would check to see, did I get that right? So that allowed people to develop more understanding about where others were coming from. And so there are also many resources on the Undivide Us webpage, and one of them included a discussion guide for hosting your own living room discussion with people of different persuasions. So I've asked my sister and brother to watch this video, and I've sent them the discussion questions, and so in a couple weeks we're going to get together for a Zoom conversation and see if we can begin listening to each other and talking in a different way. So you can probably think of people in your life that you have difficulty having these conversations with. I think all of us have to be creative in cutting down these barriers, because I think that's the only way we're going to heal as a nation is to get back to talking to each other and really listening, actually more listening than talking.